Welcome, YouTube. Laura, right here. We're talking about, this is a section, one of my favorites, the beginning. It's only like 3 weeks into the class, on grant writing. Hunting and gathering, one of my favorites. It's my sport. That's it. I like biking and I like grant writing. Laura, you had an interesting grant, and I'm seeing all my students work on the blog. So in this age of transparency, you're putting up ideas on the blog, grant group at blogspot.com for everyone. I think it's called grantsdreambook.com. So people tune into that. We'll leave the URLs along with the tags. Laura, I introduced you to the www.cost.com, a nice site that's rented or leased by Storybook for the research departments. As I said, some professor taught me this when I was 18, 19, 20, and it stuck with me. This is one of the lessons of my undergrads that stuck with me forever. I do it weekly. And every time I got in that grant, it's changed my life. Either research, travel, how to make grants, how to get equipment grants, things like that. And it's extremely important. Laura, give us the skeletal background of your idea and kind of like the conflict point or the ambiguity point that you're encountering now.
Well, I'm interested in accessible art. I am studying art history, so I'm really interested in crafting. It's something that I've gotten interested in, like mainly knitting, jewelry making, sewing, things like that, homemade.
So it's like about work, use and work. Artists as making, fabricating things useful. And did you see the Bauhaus show at the MoMA?
I did.
That's fantastic. And that's whether you're highbrow or middlebrow or lowbrow, it's all making things, and it's making things with a sense of timeliness. That's what the Bauhaus had focused on, a play between something that's useful and exchangeful. And even though it looks stiff and it has that modernist, minimalist elegance, I like looking at this stuff. I feel purged.
Yeah, I also think an interesting part of the Bauhaus and about the arts and crafts movement is that they wanted to reach the masses, wanted to reach the people, which I feel like a lot of art sometimes.
The transformation of the working classes, right? That was their agenda after World War I. Yes. So there's an ideology behind it. That's a first bullet point for our viewing audience. If you consider this a how-to lecture on how to write a grant, the ideologies behind modern Americans, let's just say the museums in America, making useful things, in our culture, whether they're chairs or as you said, knitting, or, Annie Albers did the weaving for the Bauhaus, Joseph Albers painted his paintings. So the Bauhaus often didn't even differentiate like we do now between high art and so-called low art. What else? Lead us into a couple of
I was also interested in where women fit in that, because I think a lot of crafting is associated with a stereotypical homemaker woman just at home. But now I see they're actually at this meetup site that you mentioned before, there are lots of Brooklyn knitting meetups or sewing meetups where people kind of just come together and do that sort of crafting. I'm not sure if it's just focused on women now, but I'm interested in maybe how that idea changed a little bit, or where women fit in that now, or maybe why it's associated with the youth now. I feel like crafting.
If it is gendered,
is gendered.
Okay, so we for a grant, which there is money out there for that, we have a few elements that you mentioned, Laura. We have the element of the pedagogy, why this is important to sustain and cultivate and do whatever. It's also part of the so-called creative economy where everyone has to exercise their creative selves to the fullest potential. It could or could not be gendered. We can study that, so we could be looking for grants for women, or this idea of small business startups, or it could be sustainable in the sense of looking for small grants. I've asked you guys to do a film about it, so this would be interesting, you even exploring social media and the rise or fall of handicrafts or something like that. As cottage industries. Yeah. We're entering into a very definite period of cottage industries itself, right? Because America's deindustrialized. No longer can we expect these jobs for lives with pension and health and all of that. So essentially, we're grabbing things piecemeal from the internet so we could explore that. So what I ask my students to do is who, what, why, when, how much. The who? Let's just go down the list.
I was thinking women. I don't know.
So you are getting $5,000 for a camera to study women and the social media, and these craft groups. That's cool. That's fun. Teaching skills through social media. What? Handicrafts, high, low, middle brow. Ultimately, you could, on a grant, we're doing this later in the class, going over where, or we'll talk about where, but what it could end up as a film, a documentary film about this, but also a museum exhibition.
Yeah.
What? Why? It's the big pedagogy.
Why?
I'm
interested in the handmade and the individual in art, where we kind of were losing that a little bit, I think, with this commercial
push-button culture, cut-and-paste culture, variant. And here's a big binary. We were talking about binaries. The atomic life. Molecules. Not just digital ones and zeros, but, very tangible things to make and use and so forth. Who, what, why, when. Now. We want that money now. We want it in our pockets. The when is important because a lot of these grants are reviewed at very specific times. Some like a year to 9 months in advance, a lot of them. Some you need to actually, with this letter of request, ask for a letter of submission to say, hey, am I eligible? Is this? It's always good, gang, because there's nothing worse than doing a lot of extraneous stuff without having a dialogue first. But fortunately, you can have a dialogue. On grant night, Tuesday night, Flatbush and Bergen Bark, we send out letters of introduction to these entities on email. We have the Wi-Fi there, so we send out, hey, are you even interested in this? Because that could start a conversation. And of course, we live very near New York City, which in America probably has 60, I would safely say about 60% of the foundations are in New York City. So you could even arrange FaceTime with these people. Hey, how about a coffee? How about a drink? How about a show and a movie? Something like that. Who, why, when, how. I asked you guys to have a budget. So you have $5,000 to cut up for a film. Personally, I see you writing that you will. That's a good idea. Let's just say these are these meetup groups. You get on these meetup groups related to craft, and you say, you know what, I'm contrasting this to the Bauhaus as a social movement, as a movement of the people to get away from what they felt the evil influences of markets and bureaucracies and the old royalty which led to World War I. This is like kind of a left-wing movement that was populist, very populist. You could say, well, I'm interested in populist movements, but the difference is let's explore these online. Let's see how these are getting together online. Where would you, who, why, when, how? That's how. How would you put together a budget for this?
Good question.
I ask all of you, $5,000, put that big number. Imagine that stuff in a nice new camera just sitting there right there in front of you, and the grant itself will tell you if, will give money for wages, but I asked you to write that in. If it's interesting enough, you can head out and do this. I think, personally, intuitively, I think this is a hot topic, how to forge meetup, atomic, molecular meetups, so that people teach, use, disseminate useful things with a modern aesthetic. What kind of aesthetic would you expect to find?
I don't know. It's a good question. I'm interested. Well, there's also this site called Etsy.com that people make their own whatever. It's just handmade and sell it. And this homemade, it has like a homemade look, but it's more of